My name is Clara Sterling. I'm 29 and I work as a financial analyst in Chicago. That particular morning, I was in the bridal suite of the Orchard View Pavilion, surrounded by my closest friends. I was just moments away from marrying Leo Vance, the man I'd shared my life with for the past 4 years. The clock on the wall read 11:30 a.m., giving me exactly 33 minutes until I was scheduled to walk down the aisle. That's when my phone, resting on the cool marble countertop, vibrated. A single notification was all it took to send my perfect day into a tailspin. Every single one of my accounts had been frozen. My own parents had orchestrated a financial ambush on my wedding day, a desperate last-ditch effort to prevent me from marrying Leo. They clearly had no real understanding of the woman they had raised. Before I dive into how my dream wedding devolved into a financial war zone, I'd love it if you drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to navigate the treacherous waters of a toxic family that uses money as a weapon, please hit that subscribe button. I was raised in a sprawling stone mansion in a wealthy suburb of New York, a place that didn't just whisper old money, it shouted it from the rooftops. My father, Arthur Sterling, is a private equity titan who ran our family's finances like a corporate takeover. My very first allowance at the age of 8 came with a condition. I had to maintain a detailed spreadsheet and provide receipts for every single purchase. This scrutiny extended even to my teenage trips to the mall with friends. He always said that financial discipline was essential for building character. In reality, it was a tool he used to systematically dismantle any shred of independence I tried to build for myself. My mother, Catherine, was just as controlling, though her battlefield was society, not spreadsheets. She was a former debutante from a family with a long pedigree, and she managed my life with the sole purpose of upholding our family's status. I was sent to the right schools, pushed toward the right social circles, and enrolled in the extracurriculars that would look most impressive on a college application. My own desires were never part of the equation. A Sterling never settles for anything less than the best became the mantra of my childhood, a constant, exhausting pressure to be perfect in every way. Perfect grades, a perfect appearance, perfect manners. Any slip-up was met with a stern lecture about the family's reputation and my future. When it was time to apply for college, they had my entire life mapped out. I was to follow in my father's footsteps and attend Yale Law School. I, however, had a different vision for my future. I staged a quiet rebellion, secretly applying to several top business schools. I ultimately chose the finance program at the University of Chicago, putting 1,000 miles of distance between myself and their suffocating influence. The arguments that followed my announcement raged for weeks. My father finally came around to the idea, but only by reframing it in his own mind. He rationalized that a degree in finance could be a stepping stone to a law career, a temporary detour before I came to my senses. I never did. In Chicago, away from their constant expectations, I finally felt like I could breathe. I thrived. I formed genuine friendships with people who valued me for who I was, not for the Sterling family name. I also discovered a real passion and talent for financial analysis and investment strategy. The irony was not lost on me. The very financial drilling my father had subjected me to had laid the foundation for a career he never wanted for me. After I graduated, I dropped another bombshell during one of our tense Sunday dinners. I announced that I had accepted a job at Meridian Investments in Chicago. The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. My mother's fork clinked against her porcelain plate. "Chicago," my father finally said, his voice strained. "We've already discussed this, Clara. There's a position waiting for you at Hartford Trust, close to home, where you have family connections." I didn't apply for it, I stated simply. That night set the tone for our relationship for the next several years. It was a cycle of their disappointment, their attempts at manipulation, and my increasingly firm boundaries. But I never cut off contact entirely. They were still my parents, and a small part of me held out hope that they would one day accept the life I had chosen for myself. Then, at a tech conference in Chicago, I met Leo Vance. He was the complete opposite of the man my parents had envisioned for me. He was a software developer who had bootstrapped his own small startup. He came from a working-class family in Ohio, with no prestigious family name, no trust fund, and no membership to a country club. What he did have was a brilliant mind, a kind heart, and a deep sense of integrity. He had a way of looking at me that made me feel truly seen for the first time in my life. Our first date led to weekly dates, and soon he was practically living at my apartment. With Leo, I could just be myself. I wasn't the polished, perfect Sterling daughter. I was just Clara, with all my quirks, dreams, and insecurities. When my parents finally met him at Thanksgiving dinner, their disapproval was a physical presence in the room. My mother's smile was a tight, forced line that never reached her eyes. My father subjected Leo to an intense interrogation about his startup's burn rate and 5-year projections, as if he were conducting a hostile acquisition. "He seems nice," my mother commented later, using a tone that conveyed the exact opposite. "But darling, is he really from the right background for you?" "His background doesn't matter, Mom. I love him," I replied. My father was, as always, more direct. "Love doesn't pay the mortgage, Clara. You need to think practically." What they failed to grasp was that Leo's perspective on money was one of the things that drew me to him. He viewed it as a tool for living a good life, not as a way to keep score or exert control. He worked hard, but he also knew the importance of stepping back and enjoying the fruits of his labor. For someone raised in the Sterling household, this was a revolutionary concept. 4 years into our relationship, Leo proposed during a weekend getaway to Maine. The ring wasn't the massive, flashy diamond my mother would have expected. It was a unique sapphire he had designed with a local artisan. It was perfect, and I said yes without a moment's hesitation. Telling my parents the news was as predictable as I had imagined. My mother immediately launched into a discussion about the proper venues and guest lists, which seemed to include half of New York's social register. My father, before even offering congratulations, cleared his throat and brought up the necessity of a prenuptial agreement. "That won't be necessary," I said firmly. "Don't be naive, Clara," he retorted. "Every Sterling marriage has been protected by proper financial agreements. It's not personal, it's just practical. Leo and I will manage our own finances, our own way." That became the new battleground. My parents offered to contribute to the wedding, but their offer came with a long list of conditions. They wanted final approval on the venue, the guest list, the menu, and even my wedding dress. Each time I rejected their terms, the amount of their proposed contribution mysteriously shrank. I didn't care. Leo and I were paying for the majority of the wedding ourselves anyway. We chose the Orchard View Pavilion in Millbrook Springs, a beautiful and elegant venue that wasn't ostentatious. Our guest list was filled with people who actually meant something to us, not my parents' business associates. We planned a celebration that was a true reflection of our relationship, not their social ambitions. The tension escalated throughout the planning process. My mother called me daily with suggestions that were thinly veiled demands. My father would check in periodically to ask about the prenup I had already repeatedly refused. Each conversation left me feeling drained and frustrated, but it also strengthened my resolve to marry Leo on our own terms. In the week leading up to the wedding, they seemed to finally concede. They confirmed their attendance, made reservations for the rehearsal dinner, and my mother even sent a surprisingly sweet note expressing her happiness for me. I should have known it was a strategic retreat, not a surrender. The Sterlings never give up, they just change their tactics. The morning of my wedding was picture perfect. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The temperature was in the low 70s, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the maple trees surrounding the chapel. From the window of my bridal suite, I could see the florists arranging bouquets of white roses and hydrangeas along the garden path. "Champagne for the bride," my friend Sophie announced, gliding into the room with a tray of mimosas. Isabel and Chloe followed, already radiant in their sage green gowns. Mia, my maid of honor and my closest friend since college, was coordinating everything with the efficiency of a military general. The hairstylist is running about 15 minutes behind, but the makeup artist is already set up. "We are still on schedule," she reported, clipboard in hand. The next couple of hours were a happy whirlwind of hairspray, mascara, and champagne toasts. My wedding dress, an elegant A-line gown with delicate lace details, hung by the window, shimmering in the morning sun. It all felt so magical, like the perfect start to the next chapter of my life. "You look absolutely stunning," Mia said, as the hairstylist secured the last pearl clip in my updo. "Leo is going to lose it when he sees you." That's when my phone buzzed on the marble countertop. I was tempted to ignore it. What could possibly be so important on my wedding day? But a strange feeling, a gut instinct, made me reach for it. I glanced at the screen, and the notification I saw made me freeze. "Account access restricted. Please contact customer service regarding your account status." Frowning, I quickly opened my banking app. Access denied. I tried another account and got the same message. Credit cards, investment accounts, everything was locked. "Clara, what's wrong?" Mia asked, her voice filled with concern. "I can't get into any of my accounts," I said, my own voice sounding distant and strange. "They're all locked." "It's probably just a system glitch," Diana suggested, looking up from her mimosa. My hands were trembling slightly as I dialed the customer service number. The representative on the other end was polite but firm. "I'm showing a legal hold has been placed on all of your accounts, Ms. Sterling. It was processed about 30 minutes ago." "A legal hold? That's impossible. Who authorized it?" The request came from an Arthur Sterling, authorized by a power of attorney document on file. The room started to spin. That power of attorney. I had signed it years ago when I was studying abroad in France, giving my father the ability to handle an investment opportunity that had come up. I had completely forgotten about it. He, apparently, had not. There must be a mistake, I insisted, my voice shaking. That was for a specific transaction back in 2016. It's not current. I'm afraid it doesn't have an expiration date, Miss Sterling. You would need to have it formally revoked. As I hung up the phone, a new wave of notifications flooded my screen. The payment to the wedding venue had been reversed. The payment to the caterer was declined. The photographer's payment was disputed. They're trying to stop the wedding, I whispered, the horrifying reality crashing down on me. Mia grabbed her phone. I'll call the venue manager. But before she could even dial, there was a sharp knock on the door. Grace, the venue coordinator, entered, her face pale with panic. Ms. Sterling, I am so sorry to bother you, but we have an issue with the payment. The funds were withdrawn from our account, and the bank is telling us. I know, I interrupted, my voice now eerily calm. My parents are behind this. As if on cue, my phone rang. My father's name flashed on the screen. With trembling fingers, I answered and put the call on speaker. Clara, his voice was cool and professional, as if he were discussing a business deal, not systematically destroying his daughter's wedding day. I trust you've noticed some financial irregularities this morning. How could you do this? The words were caught in my throat. This is for your own good, he replied calmly. This Vance boy has clearly clouded your judgment. A marriage without the proper financial protections is simply not something I can allow. Allow, I repeated, anger finally cutting through the shock. I'm 29 years old. You don't get to allow me to do anything. As long as your finances are connected to family accounts, I have both the legal right and the paternal duty to protect our family's assets. It's quite simple. Call off this inappropriate wedding, come home, and we can sort this out like reasonable adults. If you choose to proceed with this mistake, you will do so without any financial support whatsoever. My bridesmaids stared at each other in horror. Mia's hand squeezed my shoulder, a silent gesture of support. You can't do this, I said, even though I knew he could and he had. I've already done it. The choice is yours. His tone softened, which somehow made it even worse. Clara, we only want what's best for you. One day you'll understand. What's best for me is marrying Leo. Then you'll do so without a penny to your name. The line went dead. I sat there motionless, the phone still clutched in my hand. Tears threatened to ruin my perfectly applied makeup. The beautiful day, the perfect wedding I had spent months planning, was collapsing around me, all because my parents couldn't stand to lose control. What do we do now? Chloe asked quietly. I looked at the concerned faces of my friends, at my beautiful wedding dress still catching the sunlight, and at the chapel visible through the window where Leo was waiting for me. We need to talk to Leo, I said finally. And then we need a plan. No, don't let him see the dress, Sophie protested as Mia texted Leo, telling him to come to the bridal suite. I think breaking with tradition is the least of our problems right now, I said, attempting a joke, but my voice cracked. When Leo knocked and cautiously entered the room, his expression shifted from excitement to deep concern in a heartbeat. He looked so handsome in his charcoal gray suit. He rushed to my side, ignoring any wedding day superstitions. What happened? He asked, taking in my tear-streaked face and the tense atmosphere in the room. I explained everything in halting sentences, showing him the locked banking apps and the messages from vendors about the reversed payments. With every detail, his expression grew darker. "Your parents did this. Today, minutes before the ceremony." The disbelief in his voice mirrored my own. "They gave me an ultimatum," I said. "Cancel the wedding or be cut off completely." Leo ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Can they actually do that legally?" "With that power of attorney, yes, at least for now. I can fight it in court, but that doesn't help us today." The room was silent as the full weight of the situation sank in. No venue, no catering, no wedding. At least not the one we had planned and paid for. "We should postpone," Leo finally said, and I could see how much it pained him to even suggest it. "We can regroup, sort out this financial mess, and do this properly when your parents can't interfere." I was about to agree when Mia stepped forward. "No," she said firmly. "That's exactly what they want. They're counting on you to give in." "But the vendors," I began. "I'll cover the immediate costs on my credit card," Mia interrupted. "We can figure out repayment later." Jackson, Leo's best man, had followed him to the suite and now joined the conversation. "I can help too. I've got savings." One by one, our friends stepped up. Isabel offered to cover the photographer. Chloe's husband said he could handle the bar tab. Leo's college roommate, now a successful chef, volunteered to smooth things over with the catering staff. Grace, the venue manager, who had been listening quietly by the door, cleared her throat. "If you can provide an alternative form of payment today, we can proceed. But I'll need something immediately to hold the reservation." Mia was already pulling out her credit card. "Put it all on this for now." I looked at these incredible people, friends who were willing to step in when my own parents had stepped out. I was overwhelmed with a mixture of gratitude and a new sense of determination. "Are you sure about this?" Leo asked me privately, while the others were busy making calls and arrangements. "We don't have to do this today." I looked into his kind, concerned, loving eyes, and suddenly the decision was crystal clear. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied. "I am marrying you today with or without my parents' blessing or their money. They don't get to win." With a renewed sense of purpose, we began to piece our wedding day back together. The ceremony would be delayed by an hour to sort out the payments. The cocktail hour might have fewer premium options, and the floral arrangements might be slightly scaled back, but we were going to get married. The next crisis arose when I remembered that my father was supposed to walk me down the aisle. The thought of that empty space beside me brought a fresh wave of tears. "I'll walk alone," I decided. "It's symbolic in a way." But as I was preparing to line up for the processional, now running almost 40 minutes late, Leo's uncle, David, approached me. He was a kind-faced man in his 60s who had always treated me like one of the family. He gently touched my elbow. "Clara, I heard what happened," he said quietly. "If you'd like someone to escort you, I would be honored. Not to replace your father, of course, but just so you don't have to walk alone." The gesture was so unexpectedly kind that I could only nod, my throat tight with emotion. When the music finally started and the chapel doors swung open, I saw what truly mattered. Leo was waiting for me at the altar, and the pews were filled with the faces of our friends, all radiating support and love. I barely even noticed the conspicuously empty seats in the front row where my parents should have been. Walking down the aisle on David's arm, I felt a strange sense of liberation. For years, I had tried to walk a tightrope, balancing my own independence with my parents' expectations. Today, they had forced me to choose, and in doing so, they had set me free. Our vows took on a profound new meaning in light of the morning's events. When Leo promised to stand by me in good times and bad, in plenty and in want, I knew with every fiber of my being that he meant it. He was marrying me, not my family name or my bank account. By the power vested in me, the officiant finally declared, I now pronounce you husband and wife. As Leo's lips met mine, the chapel erupted in applause. We had done it. Despite everything, we were married. But as we turned to face our friends as a newly married couple, I couldn't ignore the whispers and the curious glances toward those empty seats. Everyone knew something was wrong. The story would spread, questions would be asked, and our perfect day would forever be shadowed by my parents' actions. As we walked back down the aisle, my hand held firmly in Leo's, I made a silent vow to myself. My parents had taught me that money was power. It was time to show them that I had learned that lesson all too well. The cocktail hour that followed had a strange energy, a mix of celebration and conspiracy. Our closest friends, who now knew the full story of the financial sabotage, formed a protective circle around us. Others sensed that something was amiss but didn't know the details, creating an undercurrent of hushed whispers. Leo and I huddled with Mia and Jackson in a quiet corner of the garden, quickly trying to assess the financial damage. We've covered the venue and the catering, Mia confirmed, scrolling through her phone. Isabel handled the photographer and videographer. The florist agreed to a partial payment today, with the balance due next week, Jackson added. I can't believe you all did this, I said, the reality of their generosity still sinking in. Leo squeezed my hand. We'll pay everyone back as soon as we can sort this out. What about the honeymoon? Jackson asked. The honeymoon, 2 weeks in Italy, fully paid for and scheduled to start the next day. Another casualty of my parents' war. We'll have to cancel, I said, the disappointment heavy in my voice, despite my efforts to remain positive. There's just no way we can afford it now. Leo started to respond, but we were interrupted by the wedding coordinator announcing it was time for our entrance into the reception. Financial crisis or not, we had a room full of guests waiting to celebrate with us. Jackson's best man's speech was a masterpiece of diplomacy. He carefully avoided any mention of my parents, but emphasized the strength of our relationship. Some couples have an easy road, he said, raising his champagne flute. Leo and Clara have already shown that they can weather any storm together. That's not just love, that's a true partnership. The father-daughter dance presented another potentially awkward moment. Instead of skipping it, Leo's father, Michael, stepped in. His kind eyes were full of understanding as he led me onto the dance floor. Family isn't always about who you're born to, he told me quietly. Sometimes it's about the family you choose. Welcome to ours, Clara. His words brought a fresh wave of tears, but this time they were happy ones. The moment was interrupted by a notification on my phone, which I had tucked into a hidden pocket of my dress for emergency communications. Excusing myself, I slipped into the bridal suite for a moment of privacy. I checked the message. It was from my mother, her first direct communication since my father's ultimatum. What you are doing today is a terrible mistake. We only froze your accounts to protect you from yourself. Someday you will understand that this was for your own good. The text ignited a fresh wave of anger, but it also triggered something else. A memory. Something important that I had almost forgotten in the chaos of the day. 3 years ago, when my career was just starting to take off, I had helped my parents restructure their retirement portfolio. They had been impressed with my expertise, a rare moment of parental approval. They had allowed me to set up their new accounts with an investment firm. I logged into my secure cloud drive and searched through old emails until I found what I was looking for: account numbers, passwords, security questions. I had saved everything meticulously at the time to ensure I could help them manage their investments. I hadn't accessed these records since, respecting their financial privacy in a way they had never respected mine. But now, staring at this information, a plan began to form. The irony was almost poetic. My father had always lectured me about financial power. Today, he had used that power as a weapon against me. But he had forgotten one crucial detail. He wasn't the only one with access to the family's finances. As an authorized user on their retirement accounts, a status they had granted me to facilitate the restructuring, I had the ability to place a temporary hold on their funds, just as they had done to me. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the login button. This was a serious step. This was crossing a line from defense to offense. Before I could make a decision, there was a soft knock on the door. I quickly closed the email as Jessica, my college roommate who was now a financial attorney, slipped into the room. "Hiding from your own reception?" she asked with a smile that quickly faded when she saw my expression. "What's wrong? Besides the obvious parent situation that everyone is whispering about." I found myself explaining not just the day's events, but the plan that was forming in my mind. Jessica listened intently, her legal mind clearly at work. "Could I actually do it?" I asked when I had finished. "Legally, I mean." She considered the question carefully. "As an authorized user, yes, you could place a temporary freeze for suspected fraudulent activity. Would it be considered ethical revenge rather than fraud prevention? That's a murkier area." "They didn't seem too concerned with ethics when they did it to me," I pointed out. "True," she acknowledged. "But remember, any action you take will have consequences beyond the immediate satisfaction of payback." Before we could discuss it further, Leo appeared in the doorway. "There you are, everyone asking for you." He noticed our serious expressions. "Everything okay?" "Just needed a minute," I said, putting my phone away. "Financial crisis talk can wait until tomorrow." He studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "Tonight is about us. The rest is just details we'll figure out together." Taking his hand, I rejoined our reception, pushing thoughts of revenge to the back of my mind for the time being. As we swayed together during our last dance, surrounded by the warm glow of sparklers held by our friends, I made another decision. Whatever I did next, it wouldn't be driven by hurt and anger. It would be calculated, precise, and justified. It would be the response of a financial analyst, not the reaction of an injured daughter. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains of our hotel suite. For a blissful moment, I was simply Cassandra Thompson, married to the love of my life. Then, reality came crashing back. We were newlyweds facing a financial catastrophe orchestrated by my own parents. Leo was already awake, his laptop open beside him on the bed, a coffee cup balanced on the nightstand. "Morning, wife," he said, leaning over to kiss me before turning his attention back to the screen. "I'm assessing the financial damage." I sat up and peered at the spreadsheet he had created. The numbers were grim. Between my frozen accounts and our joint accounts, which my father had also managed to freeze, we had lost access to almost everything. Our deposit for the new apartment we were supposed to move into, the honeymoon, even our day-to-day checking accounts. "This is," I trailed off, the enormity of the situation hitting me all over again. "A complete disaster," Leo finished for me, with a wry smile, but not an unfixable one. His optimism was the only thing keeping me from sinking into despair. I grabbed my phone and started my own financial assessment. My parents had been thorough, but they weren't perfect. They had missed a personal investment account of mine. It was smaller than the others, but it still held about $12,000 that I could access immediately. "Okay, first things first," I said, shifting into problem-solving mode. "We need to call all the wedding vendors and explain the situation. Most of them have temporary payments from our friends, but we need to set up proper payment plans." Leo nodded and started dialing the caterer. We spent the next hour on the phone, explaining our situation without going into all the humiliating details and arranging payment schedules. Most of the vendors were surprisingly understanding once they realized we weren't trying to skip out on our bills. A knock at the door interrupted our financial triage. It was Mia, holding a cardboard tray with large coffees and a bag of pastries. "Thought you might need reinforcements," she said, setting everything down. "How bad is it?" I showed her our assessment while Leo continued making calls in the background. "We'll have to cancel the honeymoon," I concluded. "There's no way around it." "Already taken care of," Mia said, showing me the cancellation confirmations on her phone. "I called the travel agent last night. They're giving you a full credit for a future booking, minus a small fee." "You're a lifesaver," I told her sincerely. "Just doing my maid of honor duties." She hesitated for a moment. "I also have this." She handed me an envelope. Inside was $1,500 in cash. "An emergency fund from your friends. We all chipped in." I was speechless. These people had already covered the cost of our wedding, and now they were giving us their own money to help us get by. After Mia left, Leo finished his calls and joined me on the small couch by the window. "I've been thinking about the honeymoon," he said. "What if we don't cancel it entirely? I have about $3,000 in a personal savings account they couldn't touch. We could do a shorter trip. Not Italy, but maybe a few days somewhere closer." "You'd spend your savings on that after everything that's happened." "We are not letting them take this from us too," he said firmly. "We deserve a honeymoon, even if it's just a long weekend at a beach somewhere." His determination to salvage some part of our plans touched me deeply. While he was in the shower, I returned to the financial puzzle we were facing. That's when I reopened the emails about my parents' retirement accounts. The more I looked at the information, the clearer it became that I still had legal access to their entire retirement portfolio. As an authorized user with active credentials, I could place a temporary freeze on their accounts, the same kind of freeze they had used on me. This wasn't about stealing their money. It was about giving them a taste of their own medicine. It was about creating leverage to force them to undo the damage they had done. And maybe, just maybe, it was about teaching them a lesson about weaponizing financial power. I called Jessica again. I needed her legal perspective before I proceeded. If I temporarily freeze their retirement funds as an authorized user, citing unusual activity as the reason, what's my potential liability? I asked, after explaining my refined plan. Since you're not withdrawing funds, just restricting access temporarily, your liability is minimal, she explained. You could argue that you noticed unusual activity, which technically you did when they used their access to your accounts. The freeze is a protective measure pending an investigation, and you have documentation of what they did to you, which strengthens your position considerably. Just don't make any statements that could be construed as retaliatory. Officially, this is about protection, not revenge. I thanked her and hung up, my plan now solidifying. When Leo came out of the shower, I laid it all out for him. You want to freeze your parents' retirement accounts, he repeated, a look of concern on his face. Clara, I understand why, but isn't that just escalating the situation? They escalated it first, I pointed out. They didn't just cut me off, they actively sabotaged our wedding day. They need to understand that there are consequences. Leo sat beside me, running a hand through his damp hair. I'm not saying they don't deserve it. I'm just worried about what this does to any chance of reconciliation. Honestly, I'm not sure I want to reconcile with people who are capable of doing this, I admitted. But this isn't just about punishment. It's about leverage. Once they realize I can affect their finances just as they affected mine, they'll have a reason to unfreeze our accounts. After a long discussion, Leo reluctantly agreed, understanding that this was ultimately my decision to make. That afternoon, I systematically documented everything my parents had done. I compiled bank notifications, emails from vendors about reversed payments, and the transcript of my father's threatening phone call, which I had recorded. With this evidence secured, I contacted Marcus Thorne, a family lawyer Mia had recommended. What you're describing is a clear case of financial abuse, Marcus confirmed after reviewing my documentation. The power of attorney they used was for a specific purpose years ago, and while it may not have an explicit expiration date, using it in this manner could certainly be considered a breach of fiduciary duty. With legal confirmation that my parents' actions were potentially actionable, I felt more confident in my plan. If they wanted to play financial hardball, they were about to discover that I had learned from the best. We left for our abbreviated honeymoon the next day, a 4-day stay at a beachfront hotel in the Berkshires instead of 2 weeks in Italy. It wasn't what we had originally planned, but as we walked along the shore at sunset, I realized Leo had been right. We needed this time together, away from the chaos, to start our marriage on our own terms. The weekend brought me clarity and a sense of calm. By the time we returned to Chicago and moved into a smaller apartment than we had originally planned, I was ready. I was ready to execute my plan, not from a place of anger, but from a position of calculated strength. Our new apartment was half the size of the luxury unit we had planned to rent. The furniture we had already purchased crowded the smaller space, making it a constant challenge to navigate. But it was ours, paid for with Leo's savings and my untouched investment account. 3 days after we returned from our mini honeymoon, I sat at our cramped kitchen table and put my plan into action. Using the credentials I still possessed, I logged into my parents' retirement portfolio management system. As an authorized user with security verification, I had the ability to place what the system called a protective hold on the accounts. My finger hovered over the confirmation button for a long moment. Once I pressed it, there would be no turning back. This would escalate a one-sided attack into open financial warfare. I clicked the button. The system generated an automatic notification to the account holders, my parents, informing them that unusual activity had triggered a security protocol, freezing access to all funds pending verification. That verification process would require my approval. With a single click, I had frozen approximately $4.3 million in retirement assets. I wasn't withdrawing or stealing anything. I was simply restricting their access, just as they had restricted mine. Then, I waited. Leo came home from his design studio that evening to find me still at the kitchen table, my laptop open, monitoring my email and phone. "Did you do it?" he asked, setting down his bag. I nodded. "About 6 hours ago, nothing yet. They might not have tried to access the accounts today." We didn't have to wait much longer. At 8:17 p.m., my phone rang. My father's name flashed on the screen. I put it on speaker so Leo could hear. "Hello, Father," I answered calmly. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" His voice was vibrating with rage. "I just received a notification that our retirement accounts are frozen." "How distressing that must be for you," I replied evenly. "To have your finances unexpectedly restricted without any warning or explanation. I can't imagine how that must feel." The silence on the other end of the line told me he had understood the pointed parallel immediately. "This is completely different," he finally said, his tone shifting to the patronizing one he always used in business negotiations. "We acted to protect family assets from an impulsive decision. You are committing financial sabotage." An interesting perspective. I saw unusual activity in family accounts, specifically the unauthorized use of an outdated power of attorney to freeze my personal assets on my wedding day. I took protective action pending an investigation. That's the explanation I'll be providing to any financial authority who asks. Another silence, this one longer. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head as he recalculated his position. "You can't do this," he finally said, but with less conviction than before. "I already have, just as you did to me," I said, my voice steady and professional. "The difference is I have documentation of your actions, which legal counsel informs me could potentially constitute financial abuse and a breach of fiduciary duty." In the background, I could hear my mother's voice asking questions, then the muffled sound of my father covering the phone to speak with her. When he came back on the line, there was a new edge of concern in his voice. "Your mother wants to speak with you." There was a rustling sound, and then my mother's voice, tight with controlled emotion. "Clara, what are you doing? This isn't like you." "Actually, Mother, this is exactly like me. A financial analyst protecting assets from questionable activity. I learned from the best, after all." "We were trying to protect you," she insisted. "That boy, my husband," I corrected sharply. "His name is Leo, and this had nothing to do with protection. It was about control." You don't understand what marriage means yet, she continued, ignoring my correction. Your father and I have been married for 35 years. We know the importance of financial compatibility. What you know is financial manipulation, I countered. And you've taught me that lesson thoroughly. Now I'm just showing you that I learned it. My mother's composure finally cracked. You can't keep our retirement funds frozen indefinitely. You're putting our future at risk. Exactly as you did to mine on my wedding day. I paused, then continued in a more businesslike tone. I've already spoken with Marcus Thorne at Thorne Legal about your unauthorized use of an expired power of attorney. He was quite interested in the case. At the mention of a prominent family law attorney, I heard my father take the phone back. You contacted Thorne? His voice had lost its confident bluster. This is a family matter, Clara. It doesn't need to involve lawyers. It became a legal matter the moment you illegally froze my accounts. Now, we have two options. We can both engage attorneys and let this play out in court with all the public attention that would entail. Or we can resolve this privately. What do you want? He asked, cutting to the chase, as he always did when he recognized he was in a negotiation. It's quite simple. You will unfreeze all of my accounts and restore my full access. You will transfer the exact amount you withdrew from the wedding vendors back to me, so I can repay my friends. And you will provide a written revocation of any and all power of attorney documents you hold. Once those steps are completed and verified, I will release the hold on your retirement funds. And if we refuse, then I will maintain the hold while I pursue legal action for financial abuse and breach of fiduciary duty. The documentation has already been prepared. Marcus is just waiting for my call. A tense silence followed. I could imagine my father's face, the calculations happening behind his eyes as he weighed his options. We'll need to verify that your proposed resolution is legally sound, he finally said. Of course, I would expect nothing less. Shall we meet tomorrow to discuss the details, perhaps with our respective counsel present? After setting a meeting time at a neutral location, a private club in Chicago, I ended the call and looked at Leo. He had listened to the entire exchange in silent amazement. That was, he began. Necessary, I finished for him. They only understand power. Now they know I have some too. The next day, Leo and I arrived at the club 15 minutes early, accompanied by Marcus Thorne. My parents were already there, my father in his customary dark suit, my mother elegant in navy blue. They both looked tense and unhappy. Their attorney, a woman named Victoria Winters, sat stiffly beside them. The initial exchanges were cold and polite. Beneath the surface, I could sense my father's fury and my mother's distress. They had not expected this. Their once obedient daughter had become a financial warrior. Let be clear about what happened here, Marcus began, after the pleasantries were out of the way. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling utilized an outdated power of attorney to freeze their daughter's accounts, with the specific intent of preventing her from getting married. This constitutes both financial abuse and a clear breach of fiduciary duty. Victoria Winters countered with legal arguments about the validity of the power of attorney, but her words sounded hollow, even to my untrained ears. As the lawyers debated, my father finally addressed me directly. Was this really necessary, Clara? This legal circus? We only wanted what was best for you. What's best for me is making my own choices, I replied. What's best for me is marrying the man I love without being subjected to financial sabotage. What's best for me is not something you get to decide anymore. We've supported you your entire life, my mother interjected. We paid for the best schools, gave you every advantage. And this is how you repay us. By marrying someone beneath your station and freezing our retirement funds when we object. Leo stiffened beside me at the beneath your station comment, but he maintained his composure. I froze your accounts because you froze mine, I said simply. Actions have consequences. That's another lesson you taught me. Hours of negotiation followed. My father tried every tactic in his playbook. Appeals to family loyalty, veiled threats about future inheritance, attempts to separate me from Leo for a private family discussion. I refused each maneuver calmly but firmly. By late afternoon, we had an agreement. They would unfreeze all of my accounts immediately. They would reimburse all of the wedding expenses, and they would formally revoke any remaining power of attorney documents. In exchange, I would release the hold on their retirement funds and sign an agreement not to pursue legal action. As we were preparing to leave, my mother caught my arm. He seems to really love you, she said quietly, glancing at Leo, who was speaking with Marcus near the door. He does, I confirmed. And I love him. That should have been enough for you. Something shifted in her expression. It wasn't quite acceptance, but perhaps it was the beginning of understanding. Will we see you again? She asked, and I could hear the genuine uncertainty in her voice. That depends on you, I replied honestly. I'm not cutting you out of my life, but there will be boundaries now, clear ones. My father approached, having overheard our exchange. He studied me with a new expression, one I had rarely seen directed at me. It looked almost like respect. You're more like me than I realized, he said, and it wasn't entirely a compliment. In some ways, I acknowledged, but I'll use what I've learned from you differently. As we left the club, Leo squeezed my hand. You were incredible in there. I did what I had to do, I said, but I felt no sense of triumph. I only felt a sad clarity about my relationship with my parents and a renewed determination to build something healthier with the family Leo and I would create. The financial war was over. We had won the battle, but the deeper conflict, the one about control, respect, and acceptance, remained unresolved. That would take much more than legal agreements to fix. It would take time and a willingness to change on all sides, and whether my parents were capable of that remained to be seen. 6 months after our wedding, Leo and I sat at an elegant table at El Ladle, an upscale French restaurant in Chicago. Across from us, looking uncomfortable but present, were my parents. This was our third dinner together since the financial standoff, and each one was slightly less tense than the last. Your new apartment looks lovely, my mother commented, making an effort at normal conversation. The view of the river must be wonderful. It is, I agreed, especially at sunset. After the settlement, we had been able to find a beautiful apartment. It wasn't the luxury high-rise we had originally planned on, but a charming brownstone with character and plenty of space for Leo's home office. More importantly, it was entirely ours, purchased with a mortgage we qualified for on our own merits, with no parental involvement. The market in that area is appreciating nicely, my father noted, unable to resist a financial observation. A good investment. We chose it because we love it, Leo said pleasantly. The investment potential is secondary. I saw my father's slight wince at this, but he nodded politely. The waitress arrived, providing a welcome interruption. As we ate, I reflected on the past 6 months. The day after our legal agreement, all of my accounts had been unfrozen. The wedding expenses were reimbursed, allowing us to repay our friends. The power of attorney was formally revoked. True to my word, I had immediately released the hold on their retirement accounts. The transactions were complete, the debts repaid. But the emotional ledger wasn't so easily balanced. For weeks afterward, there was only silence. No calls, no emails. I hadn't expected an immediate reconciliation, but the complete lack of contact was surprising. It was Leo who encouraged me to make the first move. If you want any kind of relationship with them, someone has to start, he had said. So I sent a brief email, just a simple update on our new apartment and our jobs. My mother responded with equal brevity, but she left the door open for further communication. From there, we began to rebuild cautiously with clear boundaries. I would not discuss our household finances with them. Leo was not a topic for debate or critique. My life choices were my own. How is the new client portfolio going? My father asked now, pulling me back to the present. The tech startup group you mentioned last time. Very well, I replied, surprised and pleased that he had remembered. We've developed a specialized investment strategy for early-stage companies that's showing strong preliminary results. I'd be interested in hearing more about that approach sometime, he said, then quickly added, professionally speaking, of course, not as interference. This acknowledgement that his interest could be perceived as interference was progress, small but significant. I'd be happy to discuss it, I offered. Professional to professional. My mother turned to Leo, making her own effort. And your design agency, Leo. Clara mentioned you won an award recently. Leo nodded. The AGA Regional Excellence Award for our work with the Children's Hospital. It's opened up some interesting new opportunities. That's impressive, she said, and though her smile was still a bit stiff, her words seemed genuine. The rest of the dinner was careful but civil. We talked about neutral topics, books, travel, a recent exhibit at the Art Institute. Not once did my parents mention their disappointment in our marriage or what they had once called my rebellion. After dessert, as we were preparing to leave, my father hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket. We brought something for you, he said, producing a small, wrapped package. A belated housewarming gift. I accepted it cautiously, years of experience making me wary of gifts with strings attached. I opened it to find a beautiful silver frame. Inside was a professional photo from our wedding, one of the few taken with all 4 of us during the tense reception, before I had discovered their financial sabotage. It's a lovely picture, my mother said softly, despite everything. The photo showed Leo and me in the center, glowing with happiness, flanked by my parents, who managed to look appropriate, if not exactly joyful. A family portrait of contrasts. Thank you, I said sincerely. The gift wasn't extravagant or manipulative. It was a simple acknowledgement of our marriage as a reality. After saying our goodbyes, Leo and I walked home along the lamplit streets of Chicago. That went better than last time, he observed. It did, I agreed. Still awkward but less combative. Do you think they're actually accepting us, or just realizing they can't change things? I considered this. Maybe a bit of both. They're practical people. Even if they still disapprove, they've recognized that maintaining a relationship with me means accepting you. The lowest of bars, he joked, but I'll take it. A year after our wedding, we invited my parents to our home for the first time. The visit was still tinged with tension, but it was another step forward. My mother brought flowers and commented genuinely on our decor. My father refrained from offering any unsolicited financial advice. Most significantly, I watched them interact with Leo without the thinly veiled disdain of the past. They asked about his work, listened to his stories, and even laughed at his jokes. It wasn't the behavior of people who had fully embraced him as family, but it was a world away from their previous rejection. Over the next year, our relationship continued its cautious evolution. We settled into a pattern of monthly dinners, occasional emails, and holiday gatherings that grew less strained over time. My parents never explicitly apologized for what they did on our wedding day. That wasn't their style. But their consistent respect for my boundaries spoke volumes. For my 30th birthday, they sent a card with a check. The amount was generous, but not excessive, not an attempt to buy my affection. The note simply read, "To use as you wish, no strings attached." I deposited it into the savings account Leo, and I had started for our future family. Our choice, our future. 2 years after our wedding day disaster, we hosted a dinner party in our brownstone. Our friends filled the dining room and spilled into the living room, the air warm with conversation and laughter. Among them, somewhat reserved but present, were my parents. From the kitchen, I watched as Leo engaged my father in a discussion about a documentary series they had both seen. In the living room, my mother was chatting with Mia about her recent promotion. They weren't the center of our social circle, but they were a part of it, one piece of the varied, beautiful mosaic of relationships we had built. Later, as the guests were leaving and Leo was clearing dishes, my father joined me on the small balcony where I had stepped out for a moment of quiet. "You've built a good life here," he said, looking out at the city lights rather than at me. "Different than what I envisioned for you, but good." From him, this was high praise. "Thank you," I replied simply. "I still think about what happened," he continued, surprising me with this rare reference to our unspoken past. "Your wedding day, the accounts," he paused. "It wasn't my finest moment." This was as close to an apology as Arthur Sterling was ever likely to offer. "No," I agreed. "It was." "You outplayed me," he said, and I caught the hint of wry admiration in his tone. "You used my own tactics against me." "I learned from the best," I replied, echoing the words I had spoken during our confrontation. But this time, they carried a different weight. Less of an accusation and more of an acknowledgement of a complex inheritance. Inside, I could hear Leo laughing with our friends, the sound of the life we had built together. A life that now, tentatively, had room for my parents, not as controllers, but as participants on our terms. The wealth I had accumulated wasn't measured in bank accounts or investments anymore. It was calculated in boundaries respected, independence maintained, and relationships rebuilt on healthier foundations. It was a different kind of financial education than my father had ever intended to provide, but perhaps it was the most valuable one I had ever received. As we stood there, watching the city lights, I realized that we had both learned something from our financial war. He had learned that I could not be controlled by money. And I had learned that true wealth isn't about financial power. It's about the freedom to choose your own path and the courage to defend it. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have frozen your parents' retirement accounts as I did? Or would you have found another way to handle their financial sabotage? Drop a comment below with your thoughts. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating complicated family dynamics. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself isn't just okay. Sometimes it's absolutely necessary. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the family we choose is more valuable than the family we are born into.